Page 71, Chapter 3, The Archipelago Metastasizes. While the archipelago did not develop on its own, but side by side with the whole country, as long as there was unemployment in the nation, there was no feverish demand for prisoner manpower, and arrests took place not as a means of mobilizing labor, but as a means of sweeping clean the road. But when the concept arose of stirring up the whole 180 million with an enormous mixing paddle, when the plan for super-industrialization was rejected in favor for the plan for super-industrialization, when the liquidation of the kulaks was already foreseen, along with the massive public works of the first 5-year plan, on the eve of the year of the Great Fracture, the view of the archipelago and everything in the archipelago changed too. On March 26, 1928, the Council of the People's Commissars, meaning it was still under the chairmanship of Rykov, conducted a review of the status of penal policy in the nation and of conditions in places of imprisonment. In regard to penal policy, it was admitted that it was inadequate, and it was decreed that harsh measures of repression should be applied to class enemies and hostile class elements, that the camp regimen should be made more severe, and that socially unstable elements should not be given terms at all. And in addition, forced labor should be set up in such a way that the prisoner should not earn anything from his work, but that the state should derive economic profit from it, and to consider it necessary from now on to expand the capacity of labor colonies. In other words, putting it simply, it was proposed that the camps be prepared in anticipation of the abundant arrests planned. Trotsky also had foreseen the same economic necessity, except that he again proposed that a labor army be created by the compulsory drafting of people. The horseradish is no sweeter than the black radish, but whether out of spirit of opposition to his eternal rival, or whether in order to cut people off more decisively from the possibility of complaint and hope of return, Stalin decided to process the labor army men through the prison machinery. Through the nation, unemployment was abolished. Throughout the nation, unemployment was abolished, and the economic rationale for expansion of the camps appeared. Back in 1923, no more than 3,000 persons had been imprisoned on Solovki, and by 1930 there were already about 50,000. Yet another 30,000 in Chem. Yes, and another 30,000 in Chem. In 1922, the Solovetsky cancer began to creep outward, first through Karelia, on road building projects and in logging for export. Just as willingly, Stalin began to sell its engineers. They went off without convoy work to any northern locality of their wages, and their wages were credited to the camp. Interestingly, logging exports at the time were to places like the United Kingdom, and they knew that it was coming from. It's interesting. By 1929, Stalin campsites had already appeared at all points on the Murmansk Railroad, from Lodianoye Pole to Tybola. From there, the movement continued along the Vologda Railroad, and so active was it that the Svanka Center, the Svanka station, it proved necessary to open up its land transport control center. By 1930, Sverlag had already grown strong into Lodianoye Pole and stood on its own legs. and in Kotlik had already been formed. In 1931, Vol.2 had been born, with its center in Medvedegorsk. Oh, I used to know how to say that. Which was designed over the next 2 years to bring glory to the archipelago for eternity and on 5 continents. And the malignant cells kept creeping and creeping. They were blocked on one side by the sea and on the other side by the Finnish border, but there was nothing to hinder the founding of camp near Krasnaya Vyshera in 1929. And the main thing was that all the paths to the east through the Russian north lay open and unobstructed. Oh my God. Do you imagine? Very soon, the Soroka-Kotlitz road was reaching out. We'll complete Soroka ahead of term. There's a guy, I don't know, there's a guy who walked, he started like in the 80s or something, and he walked all down like South America. Anyways, he walked all the way around, and he crossed the eastern border of Russia. He crossed the water like in a little like dinghy or something, and then walked across Russia. Like, this guy's incredible. He got held up like around Iran or Ukraine or something like that. You gotta check it out. It's a great story. Incredible guy. He's been walking for like 30 years or something. I think he just got back a couple of years ago. Sorry. The Solovetsky prisoners used to make fun of F. Almiad, who nonetheless stuck to his last and made his name as a poet and songwriter. Creeping on the northern Dvina River, the camp cells formed Dvinlag. Crossing it, they fearlessly marched on the Urals. By 1931, the Northern Urals Department of Swan was founded, which soon gave rise to the independent Solikamlag and Uralag. Oh, these names are going to kill me. The Beredniki camp began construction of a big chemical combine, which in its time was much publicized. In the summer of 1929, an expedition of unconvoyed prisoners was sent to the Chippewa River from Solovki, and under the leadership of the geologist M.B. Rushinsky, in order to prospect for petroleum, which had been discovered there as far back as the 80s of the 19th century. I should be getting a map and tracking this across a map, but I just assume it goes east across the tundra. So I don't know how interesting that would be to anyone, except me. The expedition, I do have a map on my wall. The expedition was successful, and a camp was set up on Ukhtlet, but it too did not stand still on its own spot, but quickly metastasized to the northeast, annexed the Peshora, and was transformed into Ukht-Peshleg. Soon afterward, it had its Ukhta, Inta, Peshora, and Vorkuta sections, all of them the basis of great independent future camps. Yeah, this is just across the east. The opening up of so expansive a roadless northern region as this required the building of a railroad from Kotlas via Knyazh Pogat and Ropsha to Vorkuta. This called forth the need for 2 more independent camps, which were railroad building camps. I can't say these names. Seb, Gel, Dorleg. On the sector from Couldve to the Peshawar River and Peshawar Lake, not to be confused with the industrial Ut-Peshle. On the sector from the Peshawar River to Vorkuta. True, this railroad was under construction for some time. Its BIM sector from Kniaz Pagas to Ropsha was ready for service in 1938, but the whole railroad was only ready at the end of 1942. Can you imagine building that by hand in the Siberian North? Like northern Canada? I'm in northern Canada. I can't imagine. It gets minus 50 here. I can't imagine. And thus, from the depths of the tundra and the taiga rose hundreds of new medium-sized and small islands. And on the march, in battle order, the new system of organization of the archipelago was created. Camp administrations, camp divisions, camps, OLPs, separate camps, KOLPs, commandant camps, GOLPs, head camps, camp sectors, and these were the same as work parties and work sub-parties. And in the administrations, there were departments, and in the divisions, there were sections. One production P. One production P, 2 records and classification, URCH, 3 security operations. Again, the third, the troika. And in contemporary dissertations, they wrote, not the troika, but it's like the third. And in contemporary dissertations, they wrote, the contours of the educational institutions for individual undisciplined members of the classless society are taking shape ahead of time, unquote. In fact, when there were no more classes, there will be no more criminals. But somehow it takes your breath away just to think that tomorrow's society will be classless. And does that mean that nobody will be imprisoned? Only individual undisciplined members. Classless society is not without its lockups either. And so, all the northern portion of the archipelago sprang from Solovki, but not from there alone. In response to the Great Appeal, corrective labor camps, ITLs, and corrective labor colonies, ITKs, burst out in a rash throughout our whole great country. So there's no C in the Russian alphabet, that's why ITK. There's no C. That's why it's a K all the time. It might help remembering the acronyms. There's so many. Every province acquired its own ITLs and ITKs. Millions of miles of barbed wire ran on and on, the strands of crisis crossing one another and interweaving, their barbs twinkling happily, gaily along the railroads, highways, and the outskirts of cities, and the peaked roofs of ugly camp watchtowers became the most dependable landmarks in our landscape, and it was only by a surprising concatenation of circumstances that they were now seen in either the canvas, that they were not seen in either the canvases of our artists or in scenes in our films. As had been happening from the Civil War on, monastery buildings were intensively mobilized for camp needs. Were ideally adapted for isolation by their very locations. Boris and Couldve Monastery in Torzhok was put to use as a transit camp, still there today, while the Valdaya Monastery was put to use for colony for a colony of juveniles across the lake from the future country house of Zhdanov. Milova Hermitage on Stolbany Island and Lake Selinger became a camp. Sarovskaya Hermitage was used for the nest of Patma camps, and there is no such end to this enumeration of camps. Camps arose in the Donbass, on the upper, middle, and lower Volga, and the central and southern Urals, in Transcaucasia, in central Kazakhstan, in Central Asia, in Siberia, and in the Far East. It is officially reported that in 1932, the area devoted to the agricultural corrective labor colonies in the Russian Republic alone was 625,000 acres, and in the Ukraine Republic, 133,000. Estimating the average colony at 2,500 acres, we learn that at this time, without counting the other Soviet republics, there were already more than 300 in Selkozy alone. In other words, the lowest grade and the most privileged form of camp. The distribution of prisoners between near and distant camps was easily determined by decree of the Central Executive Committee and the Council of the People's Commissars on November 6, 1929. How they managed to hit the anniversary dates of the revolution. The former strict isolation detention was abolished because it hindered creative labor, and it was ordained that those sentences to terms of less than 3 years would be assigned to general near places of imprisonment, while those sentenced to from 3 to 10 years would be sent to distant localities. Since the 58s never got less than 3 years, that meant that they all flocked to the north and to Siberia to open it up and to die. And the rest of us during those years were marching to the beat of drums. Yeah, Shalimov. I have his book too. I think I might read it after this, about Kolyma Tales, about the gold mine, one of the worst places. He survived like 17 years there. I have it in English and in Russian as I was trying to learn to read. It's very difficult. And a stubborn legend persists in the archipelago. Actually, maybe I should pause it there, and because that was a horrific chapter, and start a new chapter without all those names. If anybody wants to skip this one, they can. Thank you for listening. I'll be back in a sec.